Good morning and good afternoon. My name is Jim O'Farrell and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, How Consistent Project Management Can Make Your Company. Today what I'd like to be able to do, we'll start off with covering the agenda. And I'd like to introduce my colleague Rajiv Arankandaram. Rajiv and I are going to be taking the next 45 minutes and covering the following topics. We're going to be talking about portfolio and program management, and then we're going to have a short poll. I will then talk about some findings that I've uncovered in terms of qualitative research that I conducted over the last month with PMO professionals like many of you joining our webcast here today. Then Rajiv is going to take over and walk us through a detailed demonstration of a PMO solution that leverages our brand new solution called Smartsheet Control Center. Finally, we'll wrap it up with another poll and then we'll talk about next steps. So as I mentioned, I recently completed several interviews with senior PMO professionals across a range of companies. And what we learned is that there's a set of common challenges that each of these PMO directors and VPs are facing. In fact, relating to this quote from a recent CIO article on the state of PMO, we find that the majority of PMOs today are primarily focused on the supply side of management, on the how PMOs need to execute in terms of resources, physical assets, things of that nature, and not so much focusing on what they should be on the demand side, which is about mapping priorities to business priorities and key strategic objectives. Compounding this lack of focus on strategic mapping are changes that are occurring in the business environment each and every day, evolving business processes requiring rigid tools and methods to manage, ultimately impacting in poor program visibility and accountability. All of this leads to challenges in managing our PMOs today. So as I mentioned, we would like to get started here with a poll and ask you a little bit about your challenges by way of kicking this off. All right, we'll go ahead and close the poll and we're going to share the results with you now. And what you can see here is that evolving business processes are actually the majority of you indicating challenges with, along with multiple project management methods and processes. So those two foundational items with regards to your processes and your business are definitely driving the challenges that you're encountering with managing your PMO at scale. And I think as we get into the discussion and presentation today, you'll see how our approach leveraging consistency in lieu of standardization and rigor with respect to these types of systems will help reduce those particular challenges. So we'll go ahead and we'll hide the results and let's get started now with our presentation. So we like to refer here at Smartsheet to our environment as a work group, work management collaboration platform, and it's built on 4 pillars. Pillar 1 is tracking, which provides you with the ability to have multiple views of your work, whether it's a card view, Gantt chart, and or calendar views. Pillar 2 of our work management platform is the ability to provide you with a powerful report building capability. Many of you are already familiar with our reporting, and most of you have heard about our sites, or better known as dashboards, and our reporting capabilities in terms of resource management. That's a key pillar for us. Pillar 3, this idea of automation is also familiar to you. I'm sure you are all aware of the power of automated update requests, notifications, and alerts. All of these make your system more accountable to not only your internal users, but your external stakeholders with Smartsheet. Today, our focus is on the last pillar, on scale. Now, sometimes people think of scale in terms of users, meaning users that are using Smartsheet for a wide variety of applications. Or they might think of admin scale, which is about delegating administrative privileges across an array of managers to help managing information access. But today, our focus is on functional scale. Functional scale means how do you consistently roll out a business process or a particular unit of work from a business center? Let's take a look here now at what we mean by functional scale for the project lifecycle. The key enabler for functional scale for a PM team is based on consistency. Consistency across any of these elements in the project lifecycle. Our position is that if you don't have this consistency, you're going to face extreme challenges, whether it's setting up your organization's strategy, implementing a standardized and consistent way of conducting project initiation or execution, or team collaboration. During interviews that I conducted in the last few weeks, I talked to a lot of you in terms of directors and VPs with PMOs, and in these conversations, these elements were underscored. For example, relating to project intake and prioritization, an IT PMO director was asked about her number one challenge, and she responded to me by saying it's the idea of prioritizing projects. In her words, she said, everyone's own project is the number one project. That surely makes it difficult to prioritize when everybody has that outlook. Another example of this is an EVP of IT and PMO who mentioned his biggest concern was lack of user adoption. Team collaboration is, in that sense, essential to the success of this person's overall project lifecycle. A third example that really struck a nerve with me was on this idea of project portfolio tracking. A director of another company, a PMO, said to me last week, reporting, Jim, it keeps me awake at night. For example, how are the financials? How are we going to meet the growth profit estimates for these projects? These challenges that we describe here on this screen are symptomatic of a lack of consistency across the project lifecycle, and without it, we're in trouble. So what's underscoring that, or what's making it so hard to achieve this functional scale? Again, we alluded to this earlier in the conversation. As you can see in this diagram, it really starts on the left with changing business environment. Another example of a quote from a director of PMO highlighted this for me. He said that essentially he's doing a lot of IT infrastructure work in a company that's running about $170 million in revenues. Well, 3 or 4 months ago, they were acquired by a company that was 10x their size. So now you can imagine the impact that that's had on this director's PMO's operations and reporting. And this is not an isolated example. This is happening everywhere. That type of activity leads then to these changing business processes or evolving processes. So again, just imagine the impact of that acquisition, what that had on the processes he had to normally deal with. I interviewed a VP of a PMO who's come into an organization with no standards in place for managing projects. Now he's tackling instituting change management and project management training. His company is literally in the midst of evolving processes. So if you take these two dynamics and couple it with what people are trying to do with rigid tools and enforcing standardization with multiple PPM projects, you can see how you quickly get to the ultimate challenge, which is this lack of visibility into the project status. What that leads to is poor decisions and business performance, and overall it makes it very challenging to answer the question, are we going to make it? So many companies tackle this with enforcing top-to-bottom, end-to-end program standardization across people, process, and technology. However, this does not work very well. Users recoil, business processes change, technology gets updated, so standardization does not seem to be all that it's cracked up to be. And what we've seen here is that the users really do feel caged in and they rebel. And in fact, the PMO has tried to overcome this situation with this, this idea of users being caged in by tackling this with training. And it's pretty interesting here. The state of the PMO 2016 research points out that for every dollar spent on new tools, $2.60 or 2.6x a year investment is spent on training and onboarding alone. That's significant overhead, and still a lot of the times at the conclusion of all this training, the users are still struggling with the system, and the adoption therefore is a huge problem. Another example of a situation too is how business processes change. Standardization really fails when it comes to this area too. My background, I spent quite a bit of time working with companies that implement ERP, and I find that implementing ERP has a lot of similarity to implementing a PPM solution. And I'm sure many of you have experienced this yourselves, either directly or indirectly. The point here is it takes a long time and expense to implement. And just when you think you've got it ready to go, the business changes, as we've already discussed. The processes change. With that change, you've got to adapt. Then you need to go back and update your PPM. And that's a little bit costly. And in fact, in this particular slide here, 50% of the time, PMOs think their processes are seen as overhead. because they just can't keep up with the magnitude of change that's occurring. So that gave us a lot of insight here at Smartsheet, and it led us to this idea of Control Center. And the basis for Control Center is to provide consistency. It's about consistency. So what we're saying here is not about standardization, it's about consistency. And what does this mean? Let me give you a couple of examples here. Consistency means creating a standard budget template with controlled data entry for project codes and accounting codes, and combining that with the flexibility to allow the user the ability to update descriptions with free-form text. A second example is consistency means setting up a facilities construction template with standard tasks and subtasks, providing the flexibility to update and change dates with those tasks, or change task descriptions, or even add new tasks and subtasks. Final example could mean creating a client onboarding dashboard, one for internal use and the other for client view, providing, again, the flexibility to manage internal and external communications with one single version of the truth. These are all examples of this idea of applying consistency where it matters. Consistency means placing guardrails on project components, structure, and metadata, while combining that with the flexibility that allows users to work the way they want, thus enabling easy business process adaptation. In this slide here, what you see with this scale, it represents the balance between flexibility and control, which is the cornerstone to Smartsheet's work management platform and our new solution called Smartsheet Control Center. At Smartsheet, we've had this unique ability to bring both flexibility and ease of use together with standards and controls. Relating to flexibility, think about this. Approximately 80% of our users log into Smartsheet at least once every day. That's an industry-leading benchmark. It means there are millions of users out there using Smartsheet continually. It's simply because we're easy to use. And now with Smartsheet Control Center, we can now provide you with the additional element of control needed so that you can scale your projects and programs. Now again, before we take a closer look at Control Center, I just again want to remind you all to use the GoToWebinar control panel to ask your questions. We'll handle those real time for you. So let me set this up for you, and then we're going to have a demonstration of Control Center here in just a minute. With this particular pyramid, what you're seeing here is on the left-hand side a project type. It could be a facilities construction project type. It could be a client onboarding project type. It could be a project type associated with IT programs. Within that project type, we have a series of sheets at the bottom of the pyramid. We have, for example, associated with this project type, a project plan. We have a budget plan. We might have an issue tracker. And those are all interlinked down here at the bottom of the pyramid. Now, as you move up the pyramid of this particular project type, you then have associated reports. For example, we could have a report that pulls information from the budget sheet, pulls information from the project plan, and highlights, for example, the key issues that are mitigated from an overrun in the budget. That's an example of different types of reports that we can have at the project type level. And then as you move up the scale to the dashboard for that particular project type, you now have the ability to view KPIs associated with that particular project, providing the PM or any interested parties with what's going on with that particular project. Now, over on the right-hand side, you see instances of that project type. So each of these could represent a different instance of that facilities construction project. You might have a Seattle facilities construction project, a Chicago facilities construction, New York, and so on and so forth. And as you create those with the Smartsheet Control Center, automating the creation of all these integrated and interrelated elements along with project manager, project information, that's aggregated up into a dashboard view of all the various different projects that are underway, including any of the aggregate reports. And you'll see this here in a demonstration in just a minute. So the Smartsheet Control Center takes this information and manages that and allows you to provide both the flexibility, that is the ability to work at the granular level here with these sheets, and having the flexibility to change columns and add information, and that on top of that, have that information automatically updated to your various different reports, dashboards, and aggregate dashboards and reports. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Rajiv, and he's now going to walk you through an actual demonstration of this, first of all, starting with an outline of the Control Center demo.
Thanks, Jim. So for today's scenario, what we're going to do is take a look at an IT PMO example. We're going to start off with the initial idea coming in from a business group via a web form that goes into a demand management system, which in our world will be a simplified sheet, and we'll show you how that would work. And inside the demand management system, we'll kind of go through a multi-stage approval process, right? The request gets verified, the segments approve it, the directors approve it, which then drives it into the project manager getting ready to start the project, and that's where Control Center really starts to come in. What that allows us to do is then take the request, funnel it through, start a new project, send the metadata from that initial request or from that initial entry inside the demand management system, carry it into the projects, and both drive team collaboration on one hand so that the project execution kind of gets done with the team inside the tool, but also at the same time enabling portfolio summary reports, which ultimately feeds an IT PMO dashboard. So that's the overall scenario we're going to go through. And one of the things that you talked about earlier in the poll, a lot of you had actually answered saying you have two predominant challenges that stand out, right? Multiple tools and evolving processes. So as we go through this demonstration, I want you to think about, and we'll talk about like how what we are creating is not necessarily a fully controlled, rigid environment, but something that actually still allows for a ton of flexibility, both in the early part of how you want to manage that intake process, the initialization and the metadata that actually surrounds each of the projects, but also in terms of how the team collaboration experience can actually widely vary between the different teams. Okay, I'm going to start off at the end. So this is the overall IT PMO dashboard. That it's a site inside Smartsheet. It's built using widget-driven experiences, so you can go configure this to be how you want it to be. But one of the things that you're noticing here is we have 131 live projects, 131 projects, 78 of them are live. A quick snapshot into the overall budget and how we are tracking on it. But also you can see that like the way this particular IT PMO is set up, there are different categories in which the projects get spun up. So you can think of these as the core initiatives that the IT team is managing for that year. Application development to ePMO processes to ID transformation processes. So some of these are large-scale projects, some of these are transformational process changes, operation processes. So being able to track at all of those levels is actually like is one of the core things that this team cares about. And then alongside it, you're also seeing a list of project details that are part of this flow. I'm going to get out of that. And so let's start with the first part of our scenario, right? The request is coming in from the business group. So the business group gets in. This is a simple web form. You can have this web form embedded into a team site, a SharePoint site, or anywhere else. And when they fill it out, there's a set of required fields over here. And once they fill that out, they can just hit submit. That goes into a demand management sheet. And let's refresh that. It should show up right at the bottom. And this is where the first part of the process comes in. So once a new entry comes in, the person that's managing the queue gets notified to say, hey, you have a new entry, a new demand, new ticket that's been started in. So they can go in, read through this and say, okay, I think this is a medium level effort project, and the project is approved, right? And once the initial approval is set, that then automatically triggers notification to the segment approval. And the segment approver can then go in and say, yes, this is approved. One of the neat things is at any point in the cycle, if someone had a question, they can simply go in over here and say, hover over Daniel, right? So hover over Daniel and start a Skype chat. And what this allows you to do is have a conversation with the original requester, and once they actually answer the question, that will get saved right back into the row over here. So you can save that as a discussion, so you have a long-term history on why you made the decision, why you approved or denied it, and you have the record between the requester and the approver. Now, because the segment lead has approved it, you can see that there is an automated alert that goes out once the segment lead is approved to me to say like, hey, go approve. The director now gets to go approve it. So the director can come in and use simple filters to say, segment has already approved it. Just show me the list of things that segment has approved that's pending for my approval. Now I can come in and say, okay, I approve this project. And now the project is available for the PMO to start. This is where the control center experience begins. So the PMO comes into this place, they can then go in and start a new project. They have multiple project types that are defined. And so this is the notion that Jim was explaining on that pyramid diagram to say a project type is a collection of artifacts that form your solution. So you could have an audit and compliance project that is very different than your standard IT projects. And so depending on the project that you're starting, the person can then go in and select and say, okay, I'm going to start an PMO approved project. And when I start a PMO approved project, in this example, we have the base of a project plan, a project budget sheet, and an internal hub. The internal hub, think of it as the site of the dashboard that replaces that weekly PowerPoint that the PM has to go produce to send out the status updates. Now you can take that format and actually put it into Smartsheet, and it becomes a real-time reflection of where the project is. We also have a couple of optional templates included in this for an issue tracker and an enhancement log. Right then here, we can actually go in and say, okay, now let's go find a new project. The WAP IPsec upgrade is where we started. That's now available as a project. One of the first things you notice is it automatically brings in the series of metadata that's been associated in the demand management system, right? So project name, who's the requester, the department, the level of effort. We can then go in and say, okay, we want to make this a live project, and we're going to kick it off on the 6th of June. The due date is the 26th of June, so that gets locked in. And so the rest of the details are actually coming through, but they're locked in into the plan. So you can't actually change these things midway through this thing. So this is a good place where when we think about applying consistency, this is the notion of applying consistency to that through the metadata that surrounds the project. So being able to take just the elements that we care about that we don't want to have changed through the life cycle of the project to be actually fixed, while leaving other things that are subject to the PM's discretion, so that like things like project stage, the kickoff date, those are all subject to change, and so we want flexibility in that. So this is a good example of like combining the guardrails and the controls that we can put in place on certain elements with the flexibility that the tool actually offers at the base. One of the things you'll notice is all of this gets automated through the process where we have preset sharing rules that are locked down. So even though I am starting this project, Daniel is always going to be shared to this. And since Daniel is our PMO, he can actually make sure that the reporting that needs to get driven out of these projects are consistently maintained through the life cycle. Okay. So let me kick off the project. It's going to take a couple of minutes. And what it's really doing is it's going into our source over here, taking this IT project folder, which contains all of these sheets, creating a clone of it, placing it in the IT PMO project workspace, and then it will rename them into the right element. So if I go in and open up the IT PMO project workspace, you'll see that I have a whole list of projects in here where the project name gets appended to the start of the project, and then the rest of it kind of comes right back behind it. Right. Let's step back and see if it's done. So you can see that this project is now completed provisioning. So let's jump right into it. And one of the first things you're going to notice is there were 7 artifacts in the base folder, but since we did not select the optional template, that got removed as we get through the provisioning. So the project plan itself is only what the project team really needs and not the rest of the stuff that they do not need. In here, we have a fairly simple project plan. So let me open that one up so you can kind of see how this project plan works. So there's a summary metadata section here that includes all of the key pieces of the metadata that we captured at the early point, the objectives, the location, but it's also tracking the budgets and the variances and all of that stuff. And it's taking this data, and in this particular example, the actual project plan is a skeleton of a plan. And this is by design. So this allows you to say, like, you can either have a full-fledged plan that you're distributing as, for like audit and compliance, for example, we know the set of steps that the user should always take. So we can distribute that in the best practice template. But for most IT projects, a Skype rollout is going to be extremely different than a WAN upgrade process. And so based on the project that you're actually deploying, you need the PM to go in and say, here's what you're going to do in the planning phase of the project, the execution phase of the project, and the closeout phase of the project. So all we are defining is just that there needs to be those 3 phases. The actual task within that is subject to what the PM and the PM team needs to do. One of the advantages of actually making this separation happen is the PM team can then say, okay, for this particular project, I actually need to do this slightly differently. I'm going to use an agile process. So they can go and say, my Scrum status. If I can spell Scrum, that'll be helpful. I'm going to say, here's my Scrum status, and I'm going to say, backlog in progress done. And now very easily, I can now convert this entire project from a waterfall model to an agile model and start moving these into the respective spots, right? So it becomes really that easy for you to go in and say, here are all the things we care about, and now I can actually convert these into what are the things that we're going to be working on at any given point. So let's talk about reporting, right? So there is one of the advantages that happens because of how Control Center drives the project initialization is we showed you the metadata that gets captured at the top of every project. And now we are able to report on just that metadata element at scale across projects to give you a portfolio view, giving you the data that you care about across these projects. And the way we drive that is by creation of the summary sheet, which Control Center automates the insertion into here. So we started a project that, let me look at the activity log to find out where it went. We started a brand new project that went into the application development lifecycle. So one of the things you'll see is we inserted a new row. Oh, that's a lot of stuff. Right. IP WAN Sec is a new project that got started. It's in row 78, so let's go find it. Row 78 should be right here. So it's a live project within the application lifecycle management stream. So one of the things you can see is the WAP IPsec upgrade project is right here. You can see the link to the project, the metadata that shows up. So if you made any changes to that sheet, it's actually reflected right back into this work. And this then allows us to make sure that the overall dashboard is actually current and live. So if I refresh this now, you will see that my total project number has gone to 132. If the demo guys are with me, yep, that worked. The other advantage by driving the separation of reporting to the actual project plan is now not only can we actually drive flexible reporting into dashboards like this, we can also take that data and very simply move it into analytics, data analytics tools, and this is a Power BI dashboard that's showing you all of the projects, and now I can slice and dice this data based on things we care about. So I'm going to go look at application development projects, and it's really quickly filtering that list down to show you like, okay, I have 25 live, 6 in proposed. Most of my budgets, like I have 121K in budget spend. I have 168 assigned issues, 84 in progress. So I can really quickly dive into and say, okay, that is great. Now let me go see Sarfraz has 21 projects within this pool. So let me see exactly what he's doing. And so further filter and slice and dice this data in multiple ways to actually go get the views you care about. Right? By focusing on driving consistency within just a few aspects of the project, the intake process, the initialization process, and the reporting process, we can now not only give you real-time visibility into how the project is progressing and the plan and the status of those plans, but also very easily allow you to drive deeper insight into, are you overloaded on a particular resource type? Are you actually spending more money in one area versus the other, right? Like, for example, one of the things that you can notice over here is, if I uncheck this, across the board, my IT transformation projects are actually fairly slim. I only have 9 IT transformation projects, but that is actually a big area of focus, and we're not spending any money on it. So that those are easy kind of insights that you can now go glean on how your overall portfolio is performing and the individual aspects of those projects. Okay. So I wanted to come back to the slide to show you, here's the kind of view that we went through, right? We started off with the intake process from the business group submitting a web form through the demand management process where we have multi-stage approvals, and these are things that you can control and change based on how your process evolves. That then drives it into an intake process through Control Center, drive the project creation, and then ultimately give you portfolio level visibility in extremely flexible ways to not only allow you to view the real-time data, but also drive analytics into the real-time data. Jim, back to you.
Thanks, Rajiv. Again, when I see this, I think of a lot of these PMO directors and VPs that I spoke with these last few weeks, and this point that you're making about consistency and reporting and visibility is a challenge for a lot of these people, and I think a lot of us can now see here how using a consistent approach to this with automation can greatly enhance the visibility aspect of this. And also, I think a lot of people maybe don't really take into account this whole idea of intake too, providing a consistent way to manage the prioritization of your projects too. So I think that was a great illustration of that, and appreciate you taking the time to share that with everybody. So what we have now, we'd like to do a quick poll. We're going to launch a poll, Daniel. And what we see is some results here from this poll. We get a pretty good response here, and it looks like, if you will, the most important and most impactful to the majority of you appears to be the idea of better decision-making through better visibility, which does make a lot of sense. I think we hear that time and again. That ability as you go up the food chain in organizations and you have that need to better report on and understand what's going on with your overall portfolio is critical. And of course, the enabling characteristic for that reporting and visibility is, again, this idea of consistency. So I think we really reinforced that. Let's go ahead and we'll close out the poll now and move on to just some closing concepts and closing thoughts here. First of all, I'd just like to share with you what we see as 4 pillars of benefit and value delivered by the Control Center. And in fact, in one of our questions, somebody asked us, well, what is the difference between Control Center and sites? Well, think of Control Center as the underlying automation capability that enables you to get consistency with your templates and reports, and thus enables you to use sites more effectively. In other words, that idea of aggregating your different projects with an overall dashboard or sites view makes that easier to do. So sites is your dashboard technology. Control Center is the underlying automation capability that automates the generation of your template sheets and reports so you get that top-down view. Other value delivered here too is that the enormous reduction in manual time in terms of setting up reports and dashboards and aggregate views, streamlining, making it better in terms of reducing risk, streamlining project prioritization. That really eliminates a lot of the risks associated with dealing with projects that are not as high priority as other projects. And more importantly, ensuring that the data that's entered in about the projects is entered once. So you have a single version of the truth at all times. That consistency in data is so important in all this. And finally, what you have again is this end-to-end, fully automated, integrated and automated environment. And I think again, Rajiv clearly showed in various different points in his presentation demonstration how these value pillars are set up using the control center. I want to have one other parting thought with you too. I think it's very important for you to think about this in terms of the value, and more importantly, how we can quantify the value of this. And we do this a lot in our team. We work with you closely to understand the key challenges that you're facing in your particular situations and how we can overcome those and create goals where we can actually scale your operations and make them more efficient and provide much better visibility through this platform approach. And areas that can be impacted here are listed: scalability, customer sat, and how we enable or make that capable and actually translate that to bottom line savings on a per weekly basis or a monthly or an annual basis, and the impact this has on risk reduction. So take us up on this offer to help you with associating value with this idea of automation leveraging the Control Center platform. Thank you to all of you for taking the time out today to join us for this webinar. As Daniel mentioned, we'll be sending out the recording for the webinar. Feel free to share that with your colleagues, and we'll follow up with any of your additional questions that you may have and schedule any one-to-one discussions that you're interested in conducting with respect to Smartsheet's Control Center. Thanks everyone, and have a great day.